The great crystal throne room of the Veltareth Empire sparkled with 1,000 lights. Each crystal caught the light from the twin suns and threw it back in brilliant colors. The room was huge, bigger than most buildings on smaller worlds. High above, the ceiling curved like the inside of a giant shell, covered in more crystals that sang soft music when the wind touched them. Princess Zarathek sat on a smaller throne beside her mother's grand seat. She was tall, even for her people, with blue-gray skin that shimmered like metal. Her forearms moved with grace as she adjusted her royal robes. Long silver hair fell down her back like liquid starlight. Her people, the Veltareth, were proud warriors who had conquered 47 star systems. They were the strongest empire in this part of the galaxy, and everyone knew it. Empress Valanya sat on the main throne, her presence filling the room like gravity. She was older than her daughter, with scars on her arms that told stories of battles won. Her crown held crystals from every world they had taken. Today was Tribute Day, when representatives from conquered worlds came to show their respect and bring gifts. The line of visitors stretched across the great hall. There were the insect-like Zektar with their clicking voices, bringing rare metals from their mining worlds. The floating Nexhari offered energy crystals that glowed with inner fire. Each group bowed low before the throne, spoke their formal words, and left their tribute before backing away with respect. Zara watched it all with a mixture of boredom and satisfaction. This was how things should be. The strong ruled and the weak served. It was the natural order of the universe. Her people had learned this truth long ago, when they first reached for the stars and found them full of lesser species waiting to be guided by superior beings. Then something unusual happened. The next group to approach was very small. Just 3 figures walked across the crystal floor, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. 2 wore simple gray uniforms that looked almost like servants' clothes. The third was even more plain. Zara leaned forward on her throne, her 4 eyes focusing on this strange sight. The leader of the tiny group was a creature she had never seen before. It walked on 2 legs like many species, but was much smaller than most. Its skin was a pale brown color, and it had only 2 arms and 2 eyes. Dark hair covered the top of its head, cut short in a practical style. Most strange of all, it wore no fancy robes or ceremonial armor. Instead, it had on what looked like a working uniform. The fabric was tough and practical, colored in shades of green and brown. There were small patches sewn onto it with symbols Zara did not recognize. The creature carried no gifts, no treasure, no offerings. "What is this?" Zara whispered to her aide, a nervous Veltareth courtier who stood beside her throne. Did someone's servants get lost and wander into the throne room? The aide checked his datapad with all 4 hands moving quickly. "Your Highness, the records say this is a diplomatic mission from a planet called Earth in the Outer Rim territories." "Earth?" Zara's voice carried across the throne room, causing several other courtiers to turn and look. "I have never heard of such a place. What kind of name is that for a world?" The small group reached the proper distance from the throne and stopped. The 2 in gray uniforms stayed back while their leader stepped forward. It looked up at the royal family with calm eyes that showed no fear, no awe, no proper respect. This annoyed Zara immediately. Every other representative had at least pretended to be impressed by the Crystal Palace, by the size of the throne room, by the obvious power and wealth displayed all around them. This creature looked at everything as if it was simply taking notes. "Greetings, rulers of the Veltareth Empire," the creature said. Its voice was steady and clear, though it spoke their language with a slight accent. "I am Marcus Chen, representing the United Earth Defense Forces. We come in peace to establish diplomatic contact." Zara burst out laughing. The sound echoed off the crystal walls like breaking glass. "Did you hear that, Mother? It thinks it represents something called Defense Forces. Look at it. It barely reaches my knee." Several courtiers joined in her laughter, though more quietly. Empress Valanya remained silent, watching the human with sharp eyes. "And what?" Zara continued, standing up to her full impressive height. "Does this tiny world of Earth have to offer the great Veltareth Empire? Perhaps your people are skilled at cleaning floors, or maybe you grow pretty flowers for our gardens." Marcus Chen did not react to the insults. He stood perfectly still, his face showing nothing. This only made Zara more annoyed. She was used to her words having power, to seeing fear or anger or some reaction when she spoke. "Tell me, little creature," she said, walking down the steps from her throne. Each step rang against the crystal floor like a bell. How many warriors does your Earth have? A few hundred? 1,000, perhaps? Our current active military personnel number approximately 43 million, Marcus replied in the same calm voice. This caused a stir among the courtiers. 43 million was actually a respectable number, larger than many of the worlds they had conquered, but Zara waved one of her hands dismissively. Numbers mean nothing if the warriors are weak, she said. I could defeat 1,000 of your kind with one hand tied behind my back. 2 hands even. She gestured with her forearms to emphasize her natural advantage. Marcus said nothing. He simply watched her with those strange 2 eyes, as if he was studying something interesting but not particularly important. Do you even know how to fight? Zara pressed on. You carry no weapons. You wear no armor. You look more like a farmer than a soldier. Your Highness speaks truly, Marcus said finally. I am not dressed for battle today. Not dressed for battle, Zara repeated, laughing again. Look around you, little Earth creature. You stand in the throne room of the greatest military empire in the galaxy. My people have conquered stars while yours were probably still learning to make fire. We have weapons that could crack your tiny world in half. We have ships that could darken your sun, and you come here dressed like... She gestured at his plain uniform with disgust. Like a working soldier, Marcus finished for her. Exactly, a working soldier, as if there is such a thing among your people. Zara turned to address the court. Can you imagine? This creature thinks its little world has something to teach us about warfare. Its people probably run away from their own shadows. The courtiers laughed on cue, but Empress Velanya did not join in. She continued to watch Marcus Chen with growing interest. There was something about the way he stood, the way he held himself, that reminded her of her own veteran warriors. But that was impossible. This was clearly a primitive species from some backwater world. Perhaps, Zara said, turning back to Marcus with a cruel smile, you would like to demonstrate these amazing fighting skills your people supposedly possess? We have training facilities where even a child could show basic combat forms. Marcus looked up at her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he nodded slightly. If it would please your Highness, I would be honored to accept such an invitation. Zara's smile grew wider. This was going to be entertaining. She would finally have some fun today. Watching this pathetic creature embarrass itself in front of the entire court. It would make an excellent story to tell at future gatherings. Wonderful, she said, clapping her 4 hands together. Let us see what the mighty warriors of Earth can do. The combat simulation chamber was deep beneath the Crystal Palace. The walls were made of the same singing crystals as the throne room, but these were darker, tuned for different purposes. Instead of music, they hummed with energy that could create any battlefield the user wanted to practice on. Princess Zara led the way down the wide corridors, her steps quick with excitement. Behind her came Marcus Chen, still walking at that same steady pace. A crowd of courtiers followed, all eager to see the entertainment their princess had promised them. Word had spread quickly through the palace about the strange little alien who thought he could fight. You know, Zara said over her shoulder as they walked, most species send their strongest warriors when they want to impress us. Your people must not think very highly of you to send someone so ordinary. Marcus did not answer. He was looking at the walls, the ceiling, the way the corridors branched and connected. His eyes moved constantly, but his face stayed calm. Or perhaps, Zara continued, enjoying herself, your people are all like you, small and weak and quiet. That would explain why we have never heard of your little world before. They reached the chamber entrance. The doors were massive slabs of black crystal that slid apart silently at Zara's approach. Inside, the room was larger than the throne room above, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness. The floor was perfectly smooth and could become any surface needed for training. Now then, Zara said, turning to face Marcus with all 4 arms crossed. What sort of simulation would you like? Perhaps something simple to start? A few target drones? Some basic obstacles? What is the most difficult program you have? Marcus asked. The question surprised her. Most visitors who were shown the combat chamber asked to see something easy first, just to understand how the technology worked. No one immediately asked for the hardest challenge available. The most difficult? Zara repeated. Little creature, our most advanced programs are designed for elite Veltareth commandos. Warriors who have trained for decades, who have 4 arms instead of your pathetic 2, who are twice your size and 3 times your strength. I understand, Marcus said. May I try it? Zara stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing again. You want to try the Omega Protocol? The program that half of our veteran soldiers cannot complete? If that is your most difficult, yes. This is wonderful. Zara clapped her hands together. You hear this? She called to the courtiers who had gathered around the observation area above the chamber floor. The little earth creature wants to try the Omega Protocol. The courtiers murmured among themselves. Some laughed, but others looked uncomfortable. The Omega Protocol was not entertainment. It was a serious test that pushed even experienced warriors to their limits. Many who attempted it ended up in the medical bay. Are you certain? Zara asked, suddenly feeling a tiny bit of doubt. The simulation can cause real injury if you fail badly enough. Your people might be upset if we send you home broken. I accept full responsibility, Marcus said simply. Zara shrugged her 4 shoulders. If the creature wanted to humiliate itself so completely, who was she to stop it? She walked to the control panel and began entering commands with all 4 hands dancing across the crystal interface. Very well. The Omega Protocol it is. You will face 15 waves of increasing difficulty. Each wave includes multiple enemies with different weapons and tactics. The environment will change to test your adaptability. You will have access to any weapon you can find on the battlefield. But you start with nothing. She paused and looked at him one more time. You can stop the simulation at any time by calling for surrender. Most beings do this by the 3rd wave. Understood, Marcus said. He walked to the center of the chamber and stood quietly, waiting. Zara activated the program. The chamber floor shifted and changed, crystals rising to form the ruins of a destroyed city. Smoke filled the air, and the smell of burning metal reached their noses. In the distance, the sound of explosions echoed off the walls. 3 armed figures materialized from the simulation projectors. They were copies of Veltareth soldiers, but corrupted by the program to be more vicious than any real warrior would be. Each carried advanced weapons and moved with deadly grace. Wave 1 begins, the computer announced. Eliminate all hostiles. Marcus moved. The change was so sudden and complete that several courtiers gasped out loud. The quiet, still human exploded into motion like a coiled spring being released. He rolled to the side as the first simulated soldier fired where he had been standing, came up running, and grabbed a piece of fallen debris from the simulated ruins. The piece of metal became a weapon in his hands. He threw it with perfect accuracy, striking the first enemy in the head and causing it to dissolve back into light. The second enemy turned to track him, but Marcus was already moving again, using the terrain in ways that made Zara's eyes widen. He flowed around obstacles like water, never where the enemies expected him to be. When he reached the second soldier, he took its weapon in a move so fast that Zara's trained warrior eyes could barely follow it. The weapon fired once and the third enemy fell. Wave 1 complete, the computer said. Wave 2 begins. 5 enemies this time with better weapons and armor. They spread out to surround Marcus using proper military tactics. It should have been impossible for one being to handle all of them at once. Marcus handled them anyway. He used their own tactics against them, making them shoot each other while he stayed in their blind spots. When he had to fight directly, his movements were precise and efficient. No motion was wasted. Every action served a purpose. Wave 3. 7 enemies with energy shields. Wave 4. 10 enemies with flying support drones. Wave 5. 12 enemies with heavy weapons and environmental hazards. Each wave that should have stopped him only seemed to make Marcus more focused. He adapted to new challenges instantly, learned from each encounter, and found weaknesses in every defense. By Wave 8, the courtiers had stopped laughing entirely. They watched in complete silence as this small, plain creature did things that their finest warriors could not do. By Wave 10, Princess Zara had stopped smiling. Her 4 hands gripped the control panel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. This was not possible. This could not be happening. By Wave 12, she was staring at the readouts in disbelief. Marcus Chen was not just surviving the Omega Protocol. He was excelling at it. His performance scores were higher than any Veltareth soldier had ever achieved. Wave 15 arrived. 20 enemies, all with the best equipment the simulation could provide, supported by automated defenses and environmental dangers that changed every few seconds. Marcus faced them all without hesitation. When the final enemy dissolved and the simulation ended, the chamber fell completely silent. The computer voice announced his completion time and scores, but no one really heard the words. They were all staring at the human who stood calmly in the center of the ruined city, not even breathing hard. "That was an interesting exercise," Marcus said, looking up at the observation area. "Thank you for the opportunity to test your systems." Princess Zara opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she had absolutely nothing to say. In the silence, one of the older courtiers whispered something that made everyone else turn to look at him. "What did you say?" Zara demanded. The courtier, a veteran of many wars, looked pale. "Your Highness," I said. "What if this is not their best warrior? What if this is just an ordinary soldier from their world?" The question hung in the air like a threat. If Marcus Chen was ordinary among his people, what were their elite soldiers like? And more importantly, what were they really dealing with when they dealt with Earth? Empress Vilanya sat alone in her private study, high in the crystal spire that rose above the palace. The room was smaller than her throne room, but no less impressive. Ancient weapons from conquered worlds lined the walls, each one a trophy from a successful campaign. Star charts covered one entire wall, showing the extent of the Veltareth Empire in glowing lines of light. But tonight, the Empress was not admiring her conquests. She was staring at a holographic display that showed military intelligence files, and what she read there made her blood run cold. After watching the humans' performance in the combat chamber, she had done what any good ruler would do. She had ordered her intelligence service to find out everything they could about this species called humanity, and their world called Earth. The files had taken 6 hours to compile, drawing information from across the galaxy through the Empire's vast spy network. She wished she had never asked for them. The first file showed Earth itself, a blue and green world orbiting a yellow star. Nothing special about it at first glance. Population, approximately 8 billion humans. That was a large number, but not unusual for a developed world. Then she opened the military analysis files, and everything changed. The intelligence service had found records of human conflicts scattered across their history. What they discovered was not a peaceful species that had recently learned to fight. What they found was a species that had been fighting continuously for their entire recorded history. Humans fought each other. They fought their environment. They fought diseases and disasters and anything else that threatened them. But more than that, they had developed ways of fighting that no other species used. The files showed something called combined arms tactics, where humans used many different types of weapons and soldiers working together in ways that seemed impossible to coordinate. They had special forces who could survive in any environment and complete missions that should have been suicide. They had psychological warfare that could break enemy morale without firing a shot. But those were just the beginning. Vilanya opened a file marked recent conflicts and found something that made her hands shake. 3 years ago, a species called the Drakmor swarm had invaded human space. The Empress knew the Drakmor. They were a hive-mind insect species that reproduced faster than any other known life form. When they invaded a star system, they did not conquer it. They consumed it completely, turning every planet into breeding grounds for more Drakmor. The Veltareth Empire had encountered the Drakmor 20 years earlier. The memory still gave Vilanya nightmares. Her finest fleets, her best generals, her most advanced weapons had barely been able to drive them back. The Empire had lost 4 entire star systems before they managed to contain the threat. Even then, they had not defeated the Drakmor. They had simply convinced them that easier prey existed elsewhere. According to these files, the humans had not just fought the Drakmor. They had completely destroyed them. The war had lasted 18 months. The humans had faced a Drakmor swarm 3 times larger than the one that had nearly broken the Veltareth Empire. And they had won so completely that not a single Drakmor remained alive anywhere in the galaxy. Vilanya opened the tactical analysis of how they had done it, and felt her worldview crumble. Humans did not just fight like warriors. They fought like artists of destruction. They used strategies that no other species had ever imagined. When faced with an enemy that reproduced faster than they could be killed, humans had not tried to match their reproduction rate. Instead, they had found ways to make the Drakmor reproduction work against them. They had developed biological weapons that turned the Drakmor's own breeding chambers into poison factories. They had created computer viruses that infected the hive mind and caused entire swarms to attack themselves. They had built ships designed specifically to ram into Drakmor breeding worlds and detonate, with enough force to crack planets in half. But the most terrifying thing in the files was not the weapons or the tactics. It was the human attitude toward warfare. Other species fought when they had to. Humans fought when they chose to. Other species tried to minimize casualties and end conflicts quickly. Humans were willing to sacrifice everything if it meant achieving victory. Other species had rules about what was acceptable in war. Humans had guidelines that they followed most of the time, but when truly threatened, they abandoned every rule except one: win at any cost. The files contained recordings from the final Drakmor battle. Valanya watched human soldiers continue fighting, even when their ships were destroyed around them. She saw them volunteer for missions that guaranteed death if it meant stopping the enemy advance. She watched them sing songs as they flew ships loaded with explosives into Drakmor hive ships. They were not just good at war. They were terrifying at it, but there was more. The intelligence service had managed to find personal files on Marcus Chen himself. What they discovered explained everything about his performance in the combat chamber. Marcus Chen was not a diplomat who had been given some military training. He was not a ceremonial guard who looked impressive but had never seen real combat. He was a veteran of the human war machine who had been assigned to diplomatic duty because his government trusted him to represent them accurately. His service record read like something from a nightmare. He had fought in 7 major conflicts before the Drakmor War. He had led special operations missions behind enemy lines. He had survived battles that had killed 90% of the soldiers involved. He had been decorated dozens of times for actions that the files described with words like impossible and superhuman and beyond reasonable explanation. During the Drakmor War, he had commanded a unit called the Deep Strike Brigade that specialized in destroying Drakmor breeding facilities from the inside. His unit had a 100% mission success rate and a casualty rate that should have made such success impossible. The man who had calmly faced Princess Zara's insults was one of the most dangerous individual fighters in the galaxy. But even that was not the worst part. According to human military structure, Marcus Chen was not an elite soldier. He was not their best warrior or their most decorated hero. He was simply a good, experienced soldier who had been given a job that required someone reliable and competent. If he was ordinary by human standards, what were their actual elite forces like? Valanya closed the files and sat back in her chair, staring out at the stars. Her empire had conquered 47 worlds by finding species weaker than themselves and overwhelming them with superior force and technology. It was a strategy that had worked for centuries, but it only worked if you were actually superior. The files suggested something that terrified her more than any weapon or army. The humans were not here as supplicants begging for mercy. They were here as equals or perhaps superiors, deciding whether the Veltareth Empire was worth their time as allies, and her daughter had spent the entire day insulting them. Valanya rose from her chair and walked to the wall of weapons. Among them was her own combat blade, the one she had carried when she conquered her first world as a young princess. She touched its handle and remembered what it felt like to be young, and certain that strength was all that mattered. Now she had to face the possibility that everything she had built, everything her people had accomplished, might not be enough to protect them from a species that fought wars the way other people played games. The humans had sent Marcus Chen to evaluate them, not to beg from them. And tomorrow, he would return to his ship with a report about what he had found. Valanya could only hope that her daughter had not already ruined any chance of human friendship. Because if the humans decided that the Veltareth Empire was a threat instead of an ally, the files made it very clear what would happen next. There would be no second chances, no negotiations, no mercy. There would only be the complete destruction of everything she had spent her life building. The humans did not fight wars to conquer. They fought wars to end them permanently. The evening banquet was held in the Crystal Hall, a magnificent room where light from the setting suns passed through massive crystal windows and painted everything in colors of gold and red. Long tables stretched across the polished floor, laden with foods from across the empire. The greatest nobles and military leaders of the Veltareth sat in places of honor, while representatives from various conquered worlds filled the remaining seats. Princess Zara sat at the high table beside her mother's throne, but she was not enjoying the meal. All day her mind had been spinning with what she had witnessed in the combat chamber. The human's performance had shaken something deep inside her understanding of the world. Everything she believed about strength and superiority had been challenged by one small, quiet alien who moved like death itself when the need arose. But instead of learning from this experience, Zara had chosen to become angry about it. The human had embarrassed her in front of the court. He had made her look foolish. That was unforgivable, regardless of his skills. Marcus Chen sat at one of the lower tables, positioned according to his world's perceived importance in the Empire's hierarchy. He ate quietly, answering questions from nearby guests with polite but brief responses. He seemed perfectly comfortable despite being surrounded by aliens who could crush him with their bare hands. That calm confidence made Zara even angrier. As the evening progressed and the ceremonial wines flowed, Zara's restraint began to slip away. She had been raised to believe that her people were the natural rulers of the galaxy. Today had suggested otherwise, and she did not like that suggestion at all. "Tell me, Marcus Chen," she called out loudly enough for the entire hall to hear. "On your primitive little world, do you have anything that resembles civilization? Or do you still live in caves and hunt animals with sticks?" The conversation around the hall quieted as people turned to listen. Marcus looked up from his meal with that same calm expression that had infuriated her all day. "We have cities, Your Highness. Some are quite old by our standards. We also have art, music, literature, and philosophy." "How charming," Zara said with false sweetness. "And I suppose you think these simple crafts are somehow comparable to the achievements of the Veltareth? Our crystal cities that sing with the wind? Our starships that can cross the galaxy? Our empire that spans dozens of worlds? Each species develops according to its own path," Marcus replied diplomatically. "We find value in what we have created." "What you have created?" Zara repeated, standing up from her seat. The wine had made her bold, and the audience made her want to perform. "Let me tell you what your people have created, little human. You have created a tiny, insignificant world that nobody has ever heard of. You have created a military so weak that you send one soldier to represent billions of people. You have created a culture so backward that you do not even understand when you are in the presence of your superiors." Several nobles shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was going beyond the usual diplomatic roughness that might be expected at such gatherings. But Zara was just getting started. "Your species is so pathetic," she continued, walking closer to Marcus's table, "that you probably think today's little exercise in our combat chamber was impressive. You probably think you accomplished something significant, but all you proved is that your people are good at playing games. Real warfare is not a simulation, little creature. Real warfare is what my people do when we decide to take a world." Marcus had stopped eating. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the table, watching Zara with those unreadable human eyes. "I have seen real war," he said quietly. "Have you?" Zara laughed, the sound echoing off the crystal walls. "Fighting among yourselves over scraps of your little world? That is not war, that is just savagery. When the Veltareth make war, we bring order to chaos. We bring civilization to primitive species. We bring purpose to meaningless existence." She gestured grandly around the hall. "Look around you, human. See what real power looks like. See what a truly advanced species can accomplish. This is what your people could never hope to achieve, even if you had 1,000 years to try." "Your Highness speaks of accomplishments," Marcus said, still in that same quiet voice. "May I ask about the Drakmor?" The question hit the hall like a thunderbolt. Several nobles choked on their drinks. Others suddenly found their meals very interesting and would not look up from their plates. The name of the Drakmor was not something discussed at social gatherings. Zara's face flushed with anger. "How dare you mention that name at a royal banquet? The Drakmor are a contained threat, dealt with by the superior tactics and bravery of Veltareth forces." "Contained," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Not defeated." "We drove them back," Zara snapped. "We protected our empire and our people by abandoning 4 star systems and hoping they would find easier prey elsewhere." The accuracy of his statement made the silence in the hall complete. Everyone knew it was true, but nobody ever said it out loud. The Drakmor had not been defeated by the Veltareth. They had been convinced to leave, and everyone lived in fear that they might return someday. "At least we survived them," Zara said, her voice becoming shrill. "Which is more than your pathetic species could do if they ever faced a real threat." "We faced them 3 years ago," Marcus said simply. "What?" Zara stared at him. The Drakmor invaded human space 3 years ago. A swarm 3 times larger than the one that attacked your empire. The hall was so quiet that the crystal singing in the wind could be heard clearly. Zara felt something cold forming in her stomach, but she pushed it away. Impossible, she said. If that were true, your species would be extinct. No one defeats the Drakmor. We did not defeat them, Your Highness. We destroyed them, completely. There are no Drakmor left anywhere in the galaxy. That was when Empress Vilanya finally stood up from her throne. Zara, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Be silent. Mother, this creature is telling lies to try to... I said be silent. The Empress's voice boomed across the hall with such authority that even the crystal walls seemed to tremble. You have embarrassed our family and our empire enough for one evening. Zara turned to stare at her mother in shock. Never before had the Empress publicly corrected her, especially not in front of foreign guests. But mother, surely you cannot believe. I believe in, the Empress said, walking down from her throne toward Marcus's table, that we have been entertaining a representative of the most dangerous military force in the galaxy, and you have spent the entire day insulting him. She gestured, and suddenly the hall's crystal walls came alive with holographic displays. Images appeared showing battles, star charts, tactical analyses. The court gasped as they recognized some of the scenes. These are files compiled by our intelligence service today, the Empress announced. Information about our guests and their capabilities. The displays showed human ships engaged in combat with Drakmor swarms. They showed tactics and weapons that made even veteran Veltareth generals lean forward in amazement. They showed the complete annihilation of an enemy that had nearly broken the greatest empire in the galaxy. The human sitting at our table, the Empress continued, is not a diplomat who was given basic military training. He is a veteran of wars that would have destroyed lesser species. He has fought battles that would make our bravest warriors weep with terror, and he has done so while representing a species that views him as competent, but not exceptional. Zara felt the floor seeming to shift beneath her feet. That cannot be true. It is true, her mother said firmly. And if Marcus Chen returns to his people with a report that the Veltareth Empire is composed of arrogant fools who do not understand their place in the galaxy, we may find ourselves facing the same fate as the Drakmor. The princess looked around the hall and saw the faces of her people staring back at her. In their eyes she saw fear. Real fear. The kind that came from understanding a threat that could destroy everything you cared about. For the first time in her life, Princess Zara began to understand what it meant to be truly afraid. The silence in the crystal hall stretched like a held breath. Princess Zara stood frozen beside Marcus Chen's table, her 4 arms hanging at her sides. Around her, the holographic displays continued to show images of human military might, each one driving home the magnitude of her mistake. She looked at the faces of her people and saw something she had never seen before when they looked at her. Not respect, not fear, not even anger. She saw disappointment, the kind of deep, bitter disappointment that came from watching someone you believed in reveal themselves to be a fool. Marcus Chen sat quietly through it all, his meal forgotten, his hands still resting calmly on the table. He had not moved during her tirade, had not responded to her insults with anger or threats. Even now, with the truth revealed and her humiliation complete, he showed no sign of satisfaction or revenge. That bothered her more than anything else. If he had been angry, she could have understood it. If he had gloated over her embarrassment, she could have hated him for it. But his calm acceptance of everything she had said and done made her feel small in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. I was wrong, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words seemed to echo despite their softness. In all her life, Princess Zara had never admitted to being wrong about anything. Her people had been taught that royalty did not make mistakes, only decisions that others were too simple to understand. I was wrong about you, she continued, looking directly at Marcus. I was wrong about your people. I was wrong about what strength means. She turned to face the assembled court, these nobles and warriors who had followed her family for generations. I was wrong about many things. Empress Vilanya watched her daughter with careful eyes. This moment would define not just Zara's future, but the future of their entire empire. How the princess handled this revelation would determine whether the Veltareth continued to exist as a power in the galaxy, or whether they joined the list of species that had misjudged humanity. Your Highness, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since the intelligence files had been revealed.
May I stand?
Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. Marcus rose from his seat with the same fluid grace he had shown in the combat chamber. But now Zara understood what she was looking at. This was not just a person getting up from a table. This was a weapon choosing to remain sheathed. A force of destruction deciding to stay peaceful. "Your Highness," he said, "I would like to tell you something about my people." Zara waited, afraid of what she might hear. "We do not judge species by their worst moments," Marcus continued. "We judge them by their willingness to grow beyond those moments. What you said today, the assumptions you made, the insults you offered, these things do not define who you are. They define who you were." He gestured toward the holographic displays that still showed images of human warfare. "These battles, these victories, they do not make us superior to you. They make us experienced in destruction. That experience has taught us something important." "What?" Zara asked. "That the greatest strength is knowing when not to use your power." Marcus walked around the table until he stood directly in front of her. At this close distance, the difference in their sizes was even more obvious. The top of his head barely reached her shoulder, but Zara found herself looking up at him anyway, as if he were the one who towered over her. "My people sent me here to evaluate your empire," he said. "Not to judge whether you were strong enough to be useful allies, but to judge whether you were wise enough to be trusted allies." "And what will you tell them?" Zara asked, though she feared the answer. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. "I will tell them that I met a young leader who made assumptions based on incomplete information, but who had the courage to admit her mistakes when presented with the truth. I will tell them that I witnessed a people capable of growth and change." Zara felt tears forming in her eyes, though she tried to fight them back. "Even after everything I said? Everything I did?" "Especially because of how you responded when you learned the truth," Marcus replied. "It would have been easy to make excuses, to blame others, to refuse to accept what the evidence showed you. Instead, you chose to face reality and acknowledge your errors. That takes a kind of strength that cannot be taught or faked." He looked around the hall at the assembled nobles and warriors. "Your people have built something impressive here. Not just an empire, but a civilization that has lasted for centuries. That does not happen by accident. It happens because fundamentally your species understands honor and order and justice." Turning back to Zara, he continued, "What happened today was not a failure of your character. It was a learning experience. The question now is what you choose to do with what you have learned." Princess Zara closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she had been certain of her place in the universe, confident in her superiority, secure in her assumptions about how the galaxy worked. Now she understood that the universe was far larger and more complex than she had imagined. There were species out there with capabilities that dwarfed her own people's achievements. There were forms of strength she had never considered, types of power she had never dreamed of. But rather than making her feel hopeless, this knowledge made her feel something unexpected. It made her feel excited. For the first time in her life, she had met someone who could teach her things she did not already know. For the first time, she had encountered a challenge that could not be overcome with traditional Veltareth approaches. For the first time, she had the opportunity to become something more than what she had been. When she opened her eyes, she looked at Marcus Chen with genuine respect. Not the polite respect that was demanded by protocol, but the deep respect that came from recognizing someone who had earned it. Then, to the absolute shock of everyone present, Princess Zara began to bow. It started as a simple incline of her head, the sort of acknowledgement one might give to an honored guest. But as she continued, the bow deepened. She bent at the waist, lowering her head until she was looking at the floor. Her forearms moved to formal positions, creating the full ceremonial bow that Veltareth royalty reserved for only the most honored occasions. The court gasped. Several nobles rose from their seats in astonishment. Princess Zara was bowing to an alien in public before witnesses. It was unprecedented in the entire history of their empire, but Zara was not finished. When she straightened from the Veltareth formal bow, she moved into a different position entirely. She had studied the diplomatic files on various species, including the basic courtesy forms used by humans. The human bow was different from her people's version, simpler but no less respectful. She performed both ceremonies perfectly, acknowledging Marcus Chen according to both her customs and his own. I bow to you as a warrior, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent hall. I bow to you as a representative of your people, and I bow to you as someone who has taught me that wisdom is more valuable than strength. Marcus watched her complete the ceremony, then responded with a bow of his own. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight equal to her more elaborate display. Your Highness honors me, he said when he straightened, and through me you honor my people. That will not be forgotten. Empress Vilanya stepped forward, her face showing a mixture of pride and relief. Marcus Chen, representative of Earth, the Veltareth Empire, would be honored to establish formal diplomatic relations with your people. We offer our friendship, our respect, and our commitment to peaceful cooperation. Marcus nodded formally. I will carry that offer to my government with my highest recommendation. As the evening continued, the atmosphere in the hall transformed completely. Instead of the tense, hostile environment that had dominated the banquet, conversations became genuine exchanges of ideas. Veltareth nobles found themselves asking Marcus about human culture, technology, and philosophy. He answered their questions with patience and detail, sharing knowledge freely. Princess Zara found herself at the center of many of these conversations, no longer trying to demonstrate superiority, but instead eager to learn. She asked Marcus about human military tactics, about their approach to diplomacy, about how their society had developed its unique characteristics. The most important thing, Marcus told her during one quiet moment, is that strength and wisdom are not the same thing. My people learned this lesson through hard experience. True power comes not from the ability to destroy your enemies, but from the wisdom to know when destruction is necessary and when it is not. And how do you develop that wisdom? Zara asked. Marcus smiled, the first completely genuine smile she had seen from him. By making mistakes, admitting them, and choosing to learn from them instead of repeating them. As the evening drew to a close, Princess Zara realized that this day had changed her in ways she was still beginning to understand. She was no longer the same person